Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Barton.
And Mrs. Roper.
We're ready for some synthesis fun.
This is your first of the 3 essays for the AP test, so get ready. Don't worry, it's not hard.
All right, so you should have out a piece of paper and a pencil. Take notes as you go along in your writer's notebook.
Okay, we ready? Okay, so first we're going to look at Toulmin's method of argumentation. Ms. Barton does a really good job of breaking this one down, and we're going to talk about so what. That's one of the most important parts, so keep that in mind.
So just take a look at this visual. We'll explain what each of the pieces mean, but first we're going to start with the fact. So the fact that we have on this slide is that technologies, particularly in our very connected society, allow your parents to monitor everything you're doing electronically. We can't really dispute that fact. Can you dispute that fact, Mrs.
No,
Roper?
I mean that's an accepted fact. I think that all of you could say if you've ever had your parents shut off your phone or track you down on the GPS thing. But we're not just talking about facts. We also have to now make a paper where we present one side or the other. So you need to decide which side you fall on, and that is going to be your thesis or your claim. You have to take a stance. So this stance is parents must cease Big Brother style surveillance of their child and work instead to build trust and communication. This is not something that is a fact. This is an opinion based, and maybe you agree or disagree, but that's the point of the paper, is to create a persuasive argument.
Hey Hayden, you just made the video. All right, so now that we've come up with the side of the claim that we agree with or disagree with, we need to make sure that we can explain it through reasoned evidence. And that is what we have here as our example. So the technologies have produced no evidence proving that they actually reduce delinquency or other destructive teenage behaviors.
So now that we've said what side of the argument we fall on, we've given an example or explanation to back up why, we can't just let that hang. We have to include the so what. So here, a recent survey of teenagers indicated that 67% of students would feel extremely betrayed if their parents tracked them on their GPS cell phones. And also we have our source documentation, so we're including the research that's been given to us. But here, this so what is kind of going a little bit further into the explanation. It's not just giving one and done as far as explaining the claim. It's giving us a quote to go along with it.
But every good paper must also address the other side, and that's done through a counterclaim. So here we've looked for evidence, and what we have decided the evidence shows is parents have every right to keep tabs on their child within reason. You better rebut that, though. You can't just leave that hanging out there.
Yeah, because you've made a great paper. You've said, here's the reasons why I believe the way I believe, except I'm going to go back and I'm going to negate myself. You can't do that. So you have to have the rebuttal if you are going to include the counterclaim, which you should do. So an example here is, although the parents should keep it to a minimum, monitoring their students within reason, the world today is more dangerous, so parents need to be extra vigilant to prevent harm from coming to them. So that is an example of how the rebuttal should go along with your argument, but it should smack down whatever the counterclaim was.
So let's back up just a second and make sure we understand a new term that you're going to see in a second, and that's the word warrant. So if we look at Toulmin's argumentation, you have a claim. That's the crime that you committed, Mrs. Roper. You're making faces at me across the room right now. But in order for me to punish you, the so what that you're going to receive...
Detention.
Oh, can
or
I do
detention
that?
duty. That's even worse.
That's worse, yes.
Yeah.
I have to explain in detail my warrant. So you took your fingers, you put them in your ear, and you wagged them at me. All right, so let's take a look at this image and put Toulmin's argumentation to use in this image.
Okay, so if you can't see the text, it says, your words have power. Use them wisely.
Oh, look at the hand. I think that's probably the most graphic. So I see moron. What do you see, Ms. Roper?
You're such, and I'm imagining something negative comes after. I see pig, fool.
Is that all? Worthless? some pretty emotionally charged words, or as we learn, connotation, definitely.
Definitely some negative connotations going on in here.
So if we were to apply Tolman's argumentation, we would look first at the facts. What are the facts of that image?
Okay, so the fact here is that there is a boy standing and crying. The claim moves a little bit further, and it's trying to say here that words can hurt. Words have power. Use them wisely. That they should not be used in a negative way. Then we move on to
the explanation. That would definitely be looking at him crying, looking at the way he's looking up at someone. It's explaining how we can get to the claim that words have power to hurt.
And we can assume that this is like an adult, that like a parent or maybe a loved one that's doing this to him, since he is looking up and it is a young child.
And I think even male, because look at how the hand and the size of the fingers and everything. I'm almost thinking this is a male that's abusing this child with the words that he's choosing to use.
Yeah. So the warrant here, words have power over children. Children internalize these words that are used to describe them. It ends up hurting them. Thus, we see the tear rolling down the cheek and the fact that he looks like he's afraid.
All right, so now that we talked about Tolman's argumentation and just a brief overview of it, and trust us, we'll come back to that over and over, it's time to try our hand at our first synthesis essay.
All right, so the whole purpose of question 1, or the synthesis essay on the AP test, is to persuade me.
Yay, persuasion!
Yay! Woohoo! Woohoo! But you got to do it with data.
So Mrs. Roper and I always find it very helpful to go back and look at what AP readers, those people that actually read your test and give it a score, what they have to say about the synthesis essay. So this is a direct quote, and then we'll show you exactly what words are most important. So essays earning a score of 9 effectively take a position that defends, challenges, or qualifies the claim. They effectively support their position by excellently synthesizing and citing at least 3 of the sources. The writer's argument is especially sophisticated and convincing, and the cited sources effectively support the writer's position. The prose demonstrates an impressive ability to control the language.
Blah, 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 blah. What?
What's wrong with you? That's in English.
No, it's not. That doesn't make any sense at all.
I can sum it up in one word. Ready?
Get a 9?
9. 9.
Get a 9 is 3 words. Yep.
9.
9. Okay, so we look at 9s because that's the highest score that you can get on each essay, and that, of course, is our goal. Yay! So what does all that mean? You are going to be given 6 sources. You have to use 3 of them to make your argument. So you take a stand for your claim, and then you back it up using 3 of the sources. Now, one of the sources could be used as the counterclaim that we talked about earlier. So you could have 2 that support and 1 that's the counterclaim, and then you rebut it. Okay? Notice grammar's not mentioned in this at all. Woohoo!
No, supporting your evidence is the most important part that they want you to know.
Yes, so after you've included those quotes from your 3 different sources into your paper, you have to include the so what. Why are those quotes important? How do they prove your claim?
All right, so let's talk about what you should and should not do. Although you're only required to use 3, Mrs. Roper and I really urge you to use at least a minimum of 4 of the 6 points of data. And here's why. Let's say you use one and you interpret the data incorrectly. Well, that one will be thrown out. So now you're down to 2 if you only use 3. So using 4 gives you a cushion. Plus, if you can synthesize the data together and go source A, source B, and D are all saying the same thing and sum it up in one sentence, that's using 3 sources in one data point, which is very strong synthesis skills.
You're so smart. So if you're wondering how to get started, you know that we love annotations, so that's what we recommend. You are going to quickly look through the 6 sources that you're given, and you are going to find any evidence as you read through them that you can use as your support or as your counterclaim. Go ahead and highlight it, bold it, put a star next to it.
Hearts, hearts.
Glitter, rainbows, butterflies, whatever it takes for you to remember that that was a point that you definitely wanted to use in your paper.
This is a copy of your prompt page with the identifying information for your sources. I can talk today. The suggested time frame for your creation, background paragraph that establishes the context of the issue, a paragraph that continues reading, writing instructions, and specific directives. The proctor will tell you to read all the sources and then to synthesize 3. But remember, cite, don't summarize.
In a push, they do like for you to summarize at some point. So don't get this confused with that class if you're taking it. That was something that our kids did last year. You have to cite the source and always include your in-text citations. You can use the source A, B, C, D, E, F, G all the way to Z, or you can include the last name, but you have to cite and you have to have your in-text citation.
So let's go back to that pesky AP reader and see what they say about a thesis. Generally, the thesis is a high-scoring essay, does justice to the complexity of the issue being considered while foregrounding the writer's position.
What does foregrounding mean?
In the foreground, before the ground. Okay, so we're back. What does foregrounding mean? It means to establish. It's just fancy words again for telling you what a high-scoring essay would look like.
So you have to meet the complexity of the issue. So don't just think surface level. Come up with some cool ways to really dive into the depth of the prompt. And then you have to, foregrounding, what's it mean again, Ms. Barton?
Establishing! Yay!
While establishing your position. Don't forget. No fence sitting.
All right, Mrs. Roper, so then you tell us what equivocation and qualification mean.
It's defined on the screen for you, Miss Barton. Okay, so qualification, you take a side, but your use of language demonstrates your hesitation. So we don't want to do this in our paper because if you say, I may be right, I possibly might get to go to the movies this weekend. That is not a definite thing. And if you've done a really good job of really diving into the different sources that you can use, you don't want to then diminish your argument by having these weak words in your writing that take away your power.
This is really something that Stephen King talks about a lot in On Writing, and making sure that what the words that you are choosing to use have power and have meaning behind them, and you're not having all this information in that doesn't need to be there.
Told you King would never die.
And here's where we know each and every one of you will exceed, and that's to be original and be yourself. This is why we've been working on these feather circles.
Yeah, some of you are absolutely hysterical, or you really bring in your personal experiences. Don't let that stuff die. That stuff is a great addition to your writing. You're not just limited to the sources. You can also bring in your own knowledge to add to what the sources are saying, and that just shows that greater depth that we were talking about earlier. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the big things to not do. If you stick away from these, then you should be okay. So the first one, please make sure that your thesis is not unclear. That's a double negative. But you want to have a very clear thesis to make sure that there is no doubt in the reader's mind what side you're arguing.
Make sure you're answering the question. If the question is about surveillance of technology of teens, don't write about adopting a cat. That's going to make no sense for the reader.
Okay, and then like we said, you have to cite your sources. It's great if you can write a summary. It's great if you can paraphrase, but in this essay, you have to include them as a citation, a direct quote.
Also, make sure that you're using more than 3 sources. Remember, you want to have some padding in case you have an error in your analysis of a source given.
Okay, and then improper quote punctuation is bad too. Make sure you always have your quotation marks around your quote, and you have your in-text citation after the last quotation mark, and then the period goes outside the in-text citation.
And also make sure that you have the correct long quote instead of you're not relying on the long quote instead of an argument. It's better to paraphrase and put it in your own words than it ever is to give a long quote with no explanation.
You still have to cite though, but you can, if the author is very long-winded, you can paraphrase some of what they're saying and then directly quote a portion of it to narrow down how much you're having to copy down versus what words you're coming out with.
And then when we look at the sources, and this is something we'll practice, is making sure that we're analyzing them correctly and not reading into it something that we can't prove through the evidence of the text.
And the unfortunate, ever-hated grammar is always included. You end up taking away a little bit of your credibility if there's a lot of grammar mistakes, but it's not going to kill you, so don't stress too much about it. We'll work on it. So you can sleep easy.
One of the best things that we heard from AP readers when Mrs. Roper and I went to the class is that they understand that this is a first draft. It is a rough draft of your ideas. So grammar and mechanics, if they are things that you should know, like the difference between to, and there, different things like that, that might hurt you. But if a spelling error here or there because you're writing fast, not so much.
Right. And we're all going to make some common mistakes if we don't have that time to proofread, because we don't have but 2 hours to write 3 essays. And we'll get more on that as we go through, but just don't stress about the grammar.
The last thing we're going to leave you with is readability. Some of us have some handwriting issues, and we really will work with you on that. But understand that if it can't be read, it can't be graded.
Right.
So we want to work towards making sure we're writing as neat as we can, as quickly as we can. That's it. That's a synthesis. Woo woo!
It's basically like a little mini research paper that you only have about 40 minutes to write.
Oh, and to read all the research, too.
Right. But you got this. We got your back. We'll practice.
Rockstar on!